Welcome to Bake to the Future. We bring you a fresh take on the latest trends and issues impacting the baking sector through exclusive insights and conversations. Brought to you by the American Bakers Association.
Hi, welcome. I'm Haley Blumenreich.
And I'm Katie Jewell.
And Katie, wow, 2021 turned out to be quite the year.
And here we thought 2020 was quite the year.
And as the year comes to a close, we have a special episode for our listeners. With us is Bill Quigg, President and CEO of Richmond Baking and second Vice Chair of ABA. And our guest host today, you've heard him here before, is ABA's President and CEO, Rob Mackey, here to help us reflect on 2021 and, more importantly, look ahead into what to expect in 2022. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First, a little bit of background on Richmond Baking and Bill Quigg. Richmond Baking is based in Richmond, Indiana, and is the nation's oldest family-owned cookie and cracker company, continuously led by the Quigg family since 1902. And Bill's had a variety of jobs there over the years, including roles in production, sanitation, purchasing, sales, and now president and CEO. His education, industry involvement, and work history focused on his passion to help the people that make the cookies a success. In fact, my favorite quote from Bill is, quote, "All functions in the bakery are there to support the folks that are closest to the cookies," which I just think is fantastic. So thank you, Bill, for all of that. Hopefully that was a proper introduction. Before we hand the mic over to Rob, Haley and I like to ask a few hardball questions. This one's usually the hardest of all. What's your favorite baked good?
Well, I have to preface the answer by saying I'm a huge fan of Bake to the Future, and so I've listened to many, many episodes, if not all of them. So I came very well prepared for this question, I have to admit. And being lifelong in the baking industry, this is critical, and I have customers out there, so I don't want to offend anybody. But the answer to the question is really a combination. I can't just eat a baked good by itself. My favorite baked good, to be specific, is a chocolate chip cookie. However, the best way to eat a chocolate chip cookie, which may not be known to all listeners, is with a good ice-cold IPA beer. That combination is unbelievable.
I like it. Baked goods and beers. Maybe we can make that a theme.
I definitely thought that you were going to say ice-cold milk, and so...
Yeah, the beer just gives it a special thing. And, it might have been just during college when I picked that one up. So, it still lasts for me, though.
All right. Just one little detail on the cookie, soft or crunchy? Chewy
you have to, with the beer, you kind of have to go crunchy. So I'm going to think more like Chips Ahoy Famous Amos variety.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's fair.
And we know that you grew up around the family business. Could you tell us more about how you ended up getting into the industry?
Ever since I was about 12 years old, I begged my dad to work in the bakery. I have these really fond memories of Dad and I going down on Saturdays to check things out and make sure the bakery was still doing well and, no pipes had burst or whatever. And so we're walking around with the sweet smells of the warehouse and the wooden floors creaking below our feet. And it's just a super fond memory. And so literally anything I could do to work at the bakery, I was game. So I started off when I was 12, actually, putting code dates on cartons and working in the office. And then when I turned 18, virtually on my birthday, it was the first day I was allowed to work as a mixer and sanitation and some of the other jobs. So I've just loved this industry, and really I've loved being at the bakery ever since I was a little kid.
And what's your favorite job then?
Mixing. The thing I love about mixing is it's not only good physical exertion, but it really takes a strong mind and concentration. And it's very important. If you don't get the mix right, you're not going to get anything right after that. You can't generally fix a mistake. And so I really like the combination of the physicality and the mental aspects of that role. They don't let me do it very often anymore, unfortunately.
Well, with that, we will pass it over to Rob, who's going to lead the bulk of the conversation today.
Great. Thank you, Haley. Thank you, Katie. And Bill, thank you so much. And welcome to the podcast. Just to put in a shameless plug, I think we have a class if you need to, bone up on your mixing skills. So we've got on the LMS, on the Baking Academy, we've got a class if you need to, take that. So just throwing that out there.
I am an alum of that as well as the correspondence course as well. And you're right. It's actually, I was just talking to our vice president about that the other day. It's actually a really good course.
That's great. So we've talked a lot, certainly over this year, Bill, and I think, the term unprecedented, tumultuous, a whole bunch of very emotive words to describe 2021. But how would you describe 21 for your company, and then maybe more broadly for the industry? In one word, what would that word be?
I think, to me, I think it's been very unexpected. We're in the time of year now where we're trying to do our budget for 22. And I was reflecting back as to what information we had to make decisions in the fall of 2020 to prepare for this year. And I didn't predict hardly any of the things that came about, particularly as it related to, for us as a company, incredibly strong product demand. We have just been absolutely as busy as can be. It seems like from the first part of the year. Typically, our business is pretty seasonal. There's been zero seasonality for us this year. You combine that with the shift in the labor market, which I hope we get into because I think that's a very important topic. But then you throw inflation on top of all that, and it's just really been unexpected. And fortunately, our budget ended up getting pretty close. But I think it was more luck and happenstance than it was pre-planning, because it was really hard to know what was going to happen. And I don't think we've had the same outcomes that we expected.
No, I think you make some really good points, Bill. I don't know that anybody really anticipated the breadth and scope of the supply chain challenges. If we were sitting here a year ago, we kind of knew there'd be disruptions. There have been disruptions through the pandemic, but that, and clearly the inflationary impact. In your mind, what's been the most impactful, what's been the biggest challenge for Richmond Baking Company this past year?
I think it's very much workforce related. We've really, it's interesting, having been in the business for about 30 years now. I've seen a real shift in the dynamic of the workforce. The previous couple decades, for that matter, have been really around, this is when my schedule is posted. This is when I want people to come to work. This is our attendance policy. This is our vacation schedule. Now you have to follow these rules as an employee, or in our world, a family member. But that shift has really happened in the last probably year, where you have the Uber economy, and I'll call it that only because it's really on-demand work. And it's when people want to come to work. It's when it fits their lifestyle. It's when it fits, their vacation schedule, their family schedule. And so it's really been a challenge to try to get people to find a balance between that work and that life balance, and really has caused us to really think out of the box as it relates to scheduling, as it relates to hiring. What is it that attracts people to come to work nowadays is very, very different than anything I've seen in my career. And I'm not certain we figured it out. But that has been a real challenge for us this year, and one that we're still continuing to work through.
Yeah, and I know when you built the new plant, in Kentucky, I mean, you went about it, it was more than building, physical infrastructure. It was really kind of building a new culture, a new kind of baking company. How has that culture stood the test of the last couple of years?
I think it's been a challenge, but I think we've been better positioned than we certainly would have been otherwise. Fundamentally, I think we realized when we built the bakery and when we came from the foundation of a 100-year-old company more to be an entrepreneurial startup, if you will, we really focused on what it was that people were going to care about and how to care about them. And so we've certainly had our share of turnover. We've certainly had our share of challenges, but we have a core group of people that we have really bonded with. And that core group is ever expanding. And so it's really a matter of caring about who we work with, wanting to spend time with them, wanting to pay attention to what they need, and And once we have that, then we have a foundation of a strong workforce. And I think that's a major shift. It's not punching the clock anymore. I think companies that think of their people or treat their people as numbers are really going to be challenged going forward, because I think that the workforce really demands and frankly deserves more care than that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, Bill, that you and your family and your team, really, emphasize is, respect, empowering the entire team at Richmond Baking Company. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, to me, I think the word respect is key, because I meet with our new family members every week and sort of give them a taste for what it's like to work at the company, what I find important, what our values and our mission and our vision are. And when I think of respect, what I'm really saying is respecting differences. And our country has been through so many challenges, whether it be George Floyd or other issues that have hit the media in the last year or two, or longer than that, frankly. And I really try to emphasize with our people, no one's perfect. We all come to every day with scars and issues and challenges and our history, quite frankly. And so if we can really learn to respect those differences, understand them as best we can from our perspective, and then work together in that spirit, I think we're going to be much better off. And my vision of that, or my thoughts around that, have pretty much changed pretty dramatically in the last couple of years. For a long time, I sort of believed that color blindness was the best idea, or pretending like we're all the same and treat each other the same. But really, it's kind of evolved into, we're all different, so let's respect those differences and let's see how we can live and thrive in that environment.
Was there a catalyst, Bill, for that? Was one day you had an aha moment, or was this just over time you reached this sort of evolution in your thinking?
That's a really interesting question. I don't know that I've thought about it that much, except to the extent that I think our hiring challenges have caused us to consider people that we would have otherwise not considered. And I'll give you a good example. I happened to have a conversation with the governor of Kentucky a few weeks ago, and we were talking about people that are recent felons. And in Kentucky, and I'm not sure if it's a national law, but in Kentucky, people's prison records get expunged after 7 years. And I asked the governor, I said, what's special about 7? I said, why isn't it 5? Why isn't it 3? Why isn't it 1? And so we got into this really interesting discussion about, what really makes a person, able to be reformed and then come to work. And so really that evolved into thinking about, well, really my views have changed over time. And what we're looking at is really trying to understand people's differences and what they bring to the table, whether that's recent felons, whether that's drug addiction, whether that's alcohol addiction. And we have very open conversations with our people. And we say, because of the fact we're all different and we come to the world with scars, and that's who we are today, I think it's evolved into, can we make the best of that situation, and can we respect those differences and honor them, quite frankly, and support them?
So it sounds to me like, it's become part of the Richmond Baking DNA. You're evolving through that instead of, creating some sort of new program or emphasis, but really just starting at the ground level, truly meeting people where they are in their journey, wherever they are on that journey.
I think you're right. I certainly hope it's becoming part of the DNA. I'm certainly trying to lead that thought and that value of ours. And so, it could be a challenge to get some people on board with that, and that's okay. But I hope that really ultimately we can become stronger and better because we're all different.
Yeah, and I think, as you well know, one of the emphasis of ABA's efforts and outreach in this area is really around how do we help companies wherever they are in their journey, understand what works. Because at the end of the day, if the industry doesn't solve this challenge and become, a very welcoming place, we're going to continue to have workforce challenges. And so it seems completely appropriate that your example is a very good one, about, sort of wrapping it into the overall culture as well as your sort of workforce development efforts, instead of having kind of a one-off type program.
I think so. And I think you're right. There are long-term challenges for baking companies in the industry, or as it relates to competing in the industry for labor. And it's an interesting spot that we're almost stuck between, in that half of the people that come to apply for work at our bakery think we're a little kitchen that, I like to bake at home, therefore I want to bake cookies in your bakery. And then the other half think of it as a factory. And we don't use the word factory because that denotes, it's dirty, it's dark, it's, punching the time clock kind of feeling. And we're kind of in the middle of those two ends of the spectrum. And so it's really a challenge to try to figure out how to communicate that to people in a way that's effective.
Yeah, we found, as you know, Bill, when we did the study with MPD earlier in the year, the number one obstacle, if you will, to attracting talent for the industry is letting them understand, what it is and what it isn't. I think your point about, sort of making, small products at a kitchen counter, that's what most people think of as the baking industry. And certainly, as one of the most state-of-the-art plants in the industry, that's a much different actual reality.
I think so. And so what we've tried to do is really communicate that visually with people. We almost every person that comes in to interview, we walk them through the bakery so they get an idea of the sense of scale and scope, as well as our advertising. We kind of stole the McDonald's idea, and we said we made 150 million servings of cookies last year, whatever the number was, and put it on the side of our semi-tractors so that they'd try to understand, this isn't a little kitchen mixer for sure.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We talked about some of the other challenges. How is, in your opinion, how is ABA supporting your company and frankly, the broader industry throughout all of the challenges that we've seen in the past year?
I think that the information sharing from ABA is two important things to our company, and that is timely and reliable. There are so many different versions of I'm not even going to say the truth, but of different perspectives of what's going on, whether that's the coronavirus, whether that's, jobs, whether that's whatever the issue may be. And so oftentimes I will try to turn away from the media to some degree and wait for the ABA's perspective on what's going on, because I feel like it's a really strong representative of me as a company and our company and what our needs are. And I can also count on it as being reliable information with as little filter as possible. So it's interesting, though. It's not like CNN or cable news where you have 24 hours of information. It's not like I get 50 emails a day from ABA over the latest and current developments. But instead, what I tend to find is a big event will happen, and then you can pause for a day or two, and then here's where you get your information from ABA. And that's the stuff that I really look at because it's not reactionary as much as it is well thought out and communicated on a timely enough basis to be usable, but not so fast that all the information hasn't been gathered either.
I think I so appreciate you saying that, Bill, because that is at the core of what we do is we want to get, timely information out to the industry. And it's interesting because, here in the nation's capital, we're always accused of being sort of spin meisters, and it's all about the spin. But one of the things at ABA, we prided ourselves for decades is to make sure that we get real actionable information to the best of our knowledge, out to the industry so that you and other members can make the appropriate decisions for your company and hopefully sort of navigate through. And certainly the last 2 years, it's been coming fast and furious, but hopefully navigate through some of these incredible challenges with real time, realistic information.
And I think the other important part of that is that we don't hear about every single thing that's going on in Washington, nor do we want to as bakers. We really want to hear about what's important, what's impactful, And I think ABA does a really good job of not over communicating, but instead figuring out what's really important and trying to emphasize that as something that we really need to pay attention to.
No, I really appreciate that, Bill. It would be so easy to get very distracted, as you know, and being a member of the executive committee and the board. I mean, you know the volume of issues. And I think one of the things that we really work very hard, and there's a lot of effort here, is to make sure that we're staying keenly focused, so things like, the truck driver shortage, and a lot of those, the nutrition issues, the edible oil issue, as Katie's fond of saying, it's probably one of the most esoteric issues that's out there, and yet is vitally important to the baking industry. So focusing in on those issues where we can move the needle that are going to impact your environment and certainly your bottom line, is just critically important. And I think the most recent example is, around the whole vaccine and testing mandate, where I thought we had a very vigorous discussion at our board meeting, like within about 48 hours of the administration's announcement. But, we will leave the sort of constitutional law arguments, to the talking heads on CNN and Fox News and all of that. Our focus was to make sure the administration understood the potential significant disruptions that would be caused. And I think, we've gone in with practical information. So we're able to communicate, hopefully to the industry in a concise way that's understandable. But the reverse is true, is when you and other members come to us and talk to us about what the implications are on the plant floor or the distribution side, we're able to share that, again, real world perspective. And I think, I would say 8 out of 10 times we're able to move the needle.
Yeah, the vaccine mandate has been a really interesting situation. And I agree with you, Rob. I don't necessarily think it's worthy of getting into a conversation as to whether or not it's needed or should happen or shouldn't happen, but more to say, I think the decision was made blindly to the challenges of attracting and retaining a workforce. Fundamentally, because I think whether somebody chooses to vaccinate themselves or not is their choice. However, the problem is if you do it through a mandate, as was put forth, we've got one more obstacle to attracting and retaining people. And there are lots of jobs that people can go to with 99 employees in their company that don't have to have the mandate, that frankly we're competing against for people. And so I would hate to see a family member that's worked at our bakery for any length of time at all say, well, I can't work here any longer because of this mandate. That would be a shame, frankly, and a shame in light of having a need for, we probably could hire 30 or 40 people if we had them available to hire. And so we really don't need that competitive disadvantage right now. And frankly, the country doesn't need another reason for people not to work.
No, I think you very eloquently summed that up, Bill. And it, we certainly have heard a lot of stories, again, a lot of long time experienced, skilled, employees that, this is the line in the sand for them. And, they've been multi-decades in the industry and for their company. And, it is unfortunate that, it's yet another example of a very divisive issue in our society. Our hope is that, and I think we're having an impact, that, either in communication with the administration, we're certainly, taking advantage of the legal recourse that's ahead of us, that are in front of us, that we can get to a better outcome so that we can back away from this huge disruption that's going on, in the workforce. I'd like to pivot now, and let's talk about brighter days ahead. What are you most excited about in 2022?
Oh gosh, there's just so many different things. I think I'm looking forward to some workforce stability as it relates to our business, and we're seeing signs of that right now. And maybe, hopefully, that's not a canary in the mine too much, but we're seeing some of that. I think just trying to figure out what we can do as it relates to meetings and getting together and having some of these really fun events like the convention coming up or like the IBIE coming up. It's going to be an interesting dynamic as to where we're at in regard to face masks, no face masks, all those kind of questions that I know you all wrestle with as you're planning the logistics of these events. But gosh, it just seems like we haven't seen people in so long. I mean, Zoom's great, okay, whatever, but actually being in person with somebody and being able to shake hands or bump elbows or whatever everybody wants to do at that point, there's just no connection. It's even interesting, and I've wondered across most industries, including the baking industry, we haven't come face to face with many customers in a long time. And the fun part about the meetings are generally before the meeting and after the meeting, and then you get the work done in the middle, which is the only time you're on a Zoom, right? And so to be able to have those offhand conversations and those fun interactions, I'm really looking forward to that.
No, I completely agree. We had that sort of very brief moment over the summer where there were a few industry events that happened. It was just so good, not only to see people, but just to get caught up. And, you got back to so much work gets done in the hallway, or, if you're having an IPA or another kind of beverage, and you're always talking about the future. And so much happens there. And I completely agree with you, Bill. I think there's a drive and a thirst for this industry to get back together and have those types of conversations, renewed relationships, whether they're friendships or, whether they're business relationships, but also that, that informal exchange of information and really to kind of map out, the future of the baking industry.
Definitely. I think it's going to be a welcome time for sure.
Yeah. I want to, highlight a little bit about, we've got IBIE 2022 coming up in September in Las Vegas. So while the convention will be, sort of North American focused, we are truly excited about bringing the global baking industry back together, and really to experience a lot of the innovations and help to envision the baking industry of the future. Is there anything specific you're looking forward to in Las Vegas next September?
Our company is very focused right now on how equipment relates to people. I mean, it comes back to the whole workforce issue. It comes back to, trying to find enough people and to try to get them up to speed with their job as quick as possible. We are just absolutely turning over every leaf to try to find not only just simple automation stuff. I mean, that's pretty basic, but also how do our people interact with the equipment? And how can we bring somebody up to speed, literally, off the street with a couple weeks of training and have them operate that equipment in a safe manner and in an effective manner? And I really hope that the equipment vendors are thinking about it from that perspective of what's really the human interaction with this equipment. Not only can we automate to make jobs easier. We're doing a lot of work with that right now, just the physicality of some of our jobs. We're a very flexible company, so we tend to have people do functions that could be done robotically or otherwise. And so now we're really looking at how do we make those jobs physically less demanding, i.e. more appealing to more people. But then also, how do those people interact with that equipment, whether that's cleaning, whether that's taking it apart, whether that's changing it over, toolless design, all those sort of things. I really hope to see some innovation there, because I think that's really going to be the next foray that's going to make bakeries want to change out existing equipment or add new.
I could not agree with you more, Bill. I think anything that makes it easier for the employees to interact, just like you said, with the equipment is going to make it easier to retain and hopefully attract some talent into the industry. It's going to be interesting, though. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. But my guess is the skill sets are going to change. I mean, if you're using more, process controls, more automated equipment, maybe even, bringing AI into the bakery, you're going to be looking for a different set of skills, I would think.
Excellent point, Rob. You're spot on. And really, that is a more appealing job to a lot of people. It's obviously a higher paying job. It takes more training and education, but it also has better upward trajectory. The days of hiring somebody off the street and putting them on the line a couple hours later, I think are going to go away to a large degree. And the people that get those jobs are going to be more satisfied. They're going to consider it more of a career. And so really I think it's a good blend for people overall.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about, sustainability. There's been a lot of conversation around energy use, and certainly in the middle part of the country, last year we had all of the issues with the deep freeze and issues with natural gas, but also electricity, but then also enhanced attention on waste, particularly packaging waste. Are there things that you're looking from the supplier community at IBIE 22 that might help in those areas?
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that as well, Rob. And I have to say that is not my area of expertise. So that's something that we would definitely lean on vendors for, because we do make a lot of single-use packaging, and I think the trend is going to be away from that. I can't remember the exact number, but I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they're talking about the percent of a landfill that's single-use packaging, and it was shocking. I don't think there's any doubt we need to get away from that, but I'm not sure that I've seen the technology and the innovation that makes sense. And obviously, with our business being in food service and cookies and so forth, our shelf life is critically important as well, and that's always a tough balance. And so it's going to be interesting to see what vendor innovation may come up with in that regard.
Yeah, and I think also, with that, there's the whole food safety component. I mean, there's very real practical reasons that you and other bakers use the packaging that you use. I know we've talked a little bit at the executive committee and the board level and love to get, have you share your thoughts on this. Is there a role to play for ABA? We've got most of the major packaging companies that are members. Can we be kind of an incubator or at least a facilitator or convener of these kinds of conversations so that we can talk about next generation packaging so that we can, move away? And it's not going to happen overnight, as we know, but can we move away from some of the single-use packaging? Is that an opportunity for ABA to, again, convene the industry, bakers and suppliers to address this issue?
One of the things that I think ABA has really gone down a very effective road in the last few years has been state level regulation. And I think we're just beginning that, but I feel like that's going to be an interesting area for us to continue to expand to. So to answer your question, and the reason I mentioned that is the thing that we don't want to have happen is a patchwork quilt of state regulations as it relates to single-use packaging. And so if the ABA can have its ear to the ground, really understanding what these conversations are in a state level legislation perspective, and communicate that, and really, to your point, bring the bakers and the vendors together, that this is going to be an issue. This is something we're going to have to solve. I think it might be a good motivator, because it's all too easy to simply look at the price point in some occasions and say, well, or the shelf life or the food safety, whatever issue you may be considering, and just focus on that and not look at that big long-term picture. And I think this could be an upcoming issue that ABA could certainly trumpet to those major involved parties to try to figure out how we can be motivated to find a solution.
Right. No, and I think you made an excellent point, Bill. If the industry doesn't, take this issue seriously, we're going to continue to see more and more of these initiatives, at the state level. We've already seen California, Oregon, Maine. If I remember correctly, at last count, I think there's 22 or 23 other states that are looking to do some sort of action, in this area. And the real challenge is that, from a recycling and a reuse perspective, our national infrastructure is incredibly localized, And so just here in the Washington, D.C. area, I think we have 7 or 8 different kind of recycling regimes or schemes. And, so you could drive, literally 10 miles down the road and you've got a totally different system. And so, what's going to happen is, if the baking industry and frankly other, industries don't take it seriously, the legislators in the states and maybe even at the federal level are going to step in. And to your point, having a patchwork quilt is probably the worst outcome we could imagine. So I want to switch gears and talk about your business a little bit. I was so impressed when you were on Sossalin's Since Sliced Bread podcast. You were talking about, how your food service business has been related. And I think I'll probably put words in your mouth, which I apologize. I think you said like in the last 6 months to a year, it's been just very choppy depending upon which specific sales channel you're in. Looking forward, Bill, what are you most optimistic about in the coming year for food service bakers?
Well, a large part of our business is school related, so I tend to focus in that particular area of the business more so. But I do think with the current administration, they've shown that they're willing to invest in schools and in education in general, whereas that's been hit or miss in the past. So I think that relates to school food service. Obviously, if they have funding, then they have stability to continue to buy products for them. So I think that's good. But I think also, just as it relates to food service in general, it's amazing the resiliency and the adaptability of American businesses. I'm going to be specific there. It's been remarkable to change even in the food service industry when you think about takeout beverages, when you think about outdoor heating patios and all the different things that they've done, drive-throughs versus in dining, those sort of things. But I really think that they will continue to just adapt and continue to do things that are going to be beneficial for their businesses. And they have the flexibility to do that. And I think, frankly, we've seen some real localized government working together. Again, you think about the takeout beverages, that would have been unheard of in a lot of communities for a long time. But they worked together and they got it done. And so I think we're going to continue to see that. I think, who knows, as it relates to continued restrictions, government restrictions or otherwise, locality restrictions is opening restaurants, closing restaurants, those sort of things. But what we've seen is that industry is incredibly adaptable. And so that's been pretty cool to watch.
Yeah, I'll admit, telling on myself, at a certain point, after a very long day, it was very easy and frankly, very nice to jump on, one of the delivery apps and get, a really nicely prepared Mexican meal with the most delicious margarita I may ever have had. It came to my door and, before the pandemic, that never would have happened, that whole concept. So anyway, apropos of nothing, but I just think you're right. It shows how much it's evolving and changing. And, I don't know about you, but I don't think we have a clue yet how it's all going to shake out. So let me drill in just a little bit more on schools and universities. What do you think is going to be the biggest change? If we're sitting here 3 years from now, what is going to be the biggest change for that segment of food service? And, what should bakers be doing now to adapt and maybe even partnering with their local school systems?
Well, it's going to be an interesting balance, and I can't say that I know how it's going to end up, because there was a real push during the Obama administration for freshly prepared food. That's virtually all gone away. I mean, right now, you're not going to have the freshly prepared food and the smorgasbord lines of people scooping food onto trays or whatever that may be. They really want food safe and individual packages and that kind of stuff, which rolls back into our sustainability issue that we were talking about earlier.
Right.
And so I don't know where that's going to end up. I think it's going to be an interesting blend to try to figure out where that lands. I think it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle, depending on the particular school system. I think it's going to go a little bit back more towards freshly prepared, but not entirely. And I think ultimately people are still going to want to have those individual packages that are considered to be safer.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating. We've seen all kinds of different, stories that even when kids were home learning, the school was still distributing meals, school breakfast, school lunches. It was just an impromptu drive-through setup where you would get, instead of bringing your brown paper bag to school, you would go to school and get your brown paper bag and bring it home with a healthy, nutritious meal. It just seems to me that the whole model is just under review right now. It'd be very fascinating to see how all that shakes out. So, Bill, I want to thank you so much. I always enjoy these conversations. I don't always know where we're going to end up, but I always know we're going to learn a lot. And I just really appreciate you coming on the podcast. And I'm going to throw it back to Haley and Katie. I'm sure they've got a couple of questions to wrap up. But Bill, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. And yeah, Bill, we do. I know I have just two questions. One involves, looking at everything you've been through in this last year as a leader, and then one is a crystal ball question. So first is, I know that a number of CEOs and leaders we've talked to over this last year have told us that this has been the hardest year in their entire career. I guess now we're looking at the hardest 2 years. So do you agree with that?
No, I don't. I don't think it's been the hardest. I'd say it's been the most mentally challenging. The last couple of years have been so many different pivots, whether that's as it relates to workforce, as it relates to pricing, as it relates to customer demand, supply. I mean, you name it, there's a whole laundry list. But I personally found that really exciting. That's where a CEO that's our sweet spot. That's where we have fun, in my opinion. And so to me, I don't think it's been as challenging. We've been pretty fortunate in that the businesses we're in have not been as negatively impacted as I'm sure a lot of companies have been. But there was no book about any of this stuff. And I told my family members that. I remember, and goes back to Rob's point earlier about handing out free lunches. When we, in March of 2020, I guess it was, when we first heard about this pandemic thing, I met with all of our family members and I said, I don't know what's going to happen. I said, a large part of our product goes into schools, and they may even close schools down, believe it or not. And if they do, I said, I don't think you guys ought to buy a new car this week. I don't think you ought to refinance your house. I said, we just don't know what's going to happen. And so that certainly put a lot of people on edge. But in the end, what's been interesting too is that core group of family members that work for us have really come together. I mean, we've been through adversity together, and that really bonds a group. And so there's a lot of negatives that have happened, but boy, I have to imagine they're outweighed by the positives.
I love that silver lining. Yeah, because my question was going to be, who did you rely on and who did you lean on over this last few years? And so it sounds like that core member of a group of families was it. And so now, we looked back, and as we looked forward, you did with Rob a little bit, and it's hard to predict surprises, but crystal ball, let's say we have you on the podcast again this time next year. What are we going to be talking about?
Well, I've already admitted that I'm not very good at predicting because I was completely surprised with this year. But I think that we will be surprised with the strength of the economy and the strength of the industry. I think that we will look back and say we had a lot of shifts, we had a lot of challenges, we pivoted appropriately as an industry, and we're stronger than ever. I do believe that. I think that the order book at IBIE is going to be longer than it ever has been for our vendor partners. And it's already long right now. Let's be honest about it. But once the supply chain issues get worked through, which eventually they will, then I think then that's going to really accelerate that growth. And so I think we'll look back and say, wow, this has been an awesome year.
All right. I think that's a great note to end on. Feeling a little optimistic. So thank you, Bill. Thank you, Rob, for coming on the podcast with us. It was great.
Thank you so much.
And our listeners can let us know what you thought of the show by emailing hello@americanbakers.org or leave us a voicemail at baketothefuture.org. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, whether it's Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon Music, or Ghana.
Bake to the Future is brought to you by the American Bakers Association in partnership with Human Factor. To hear upcoming and past episodes, go to baketothefuture.org. Bake to the Future is produced by Haley Blumenreich. Audio engineer is Blake Alton. And A Slice of the Action is written by the American Bakers Association's Government Relations team.